morning. Namaste. That Shakespeare of modern boxing, Mike Tyson, once said, "A fight plan is great until you get punched in the face." And for the last 8 years, it feels like I've been in the boxing ring, trying to figure out that perfect fight plan for how children, teachers, and governments can thrive in a fast-changing world. A world where, according to another famous American, there are known knowns, known unknowns, and most worryingly, unknown unknowns. And I've been not just punched, but knocked out no less than 3 times over those 8 years because of that same fundamental blind spot. So you see, a few years ago when my first son was born, I moved to the suburbs of London where I live, and with the suburbs came a very grown-up accessory, my first very own garden to tend to. And I had no idea how to do any gardening, so I called the help of a gardening specialist. And the garden was really the wrong word. It was like a small piece of dry, barren, unloved earth. And so the specialist came and he gave me some seeds to buy and to plant in the garden, which I did. 3 months later, the garden looked just the same as it was before. And so I called him in again. He gave me some new seeds. I planted them. 3 months later, nothing had changed again. And when I was so frustrated, I brought him in and he said, "Look, Sharath, I'm sorry, I don't think it's the seeds that are the problem. I think it's just that the soil is not fertile enough." And I think it's a good metaphor, a good image for what the problem has been in education. We've been focusing on these technical seeds, but our blind spot is we've not been thinking enough about the motivational soil in education for children, teachers, and governments. And let me talk about it all, each in turn. So for children, when I started STIR in 2012, I was obsessed by the horrific data we were seeing showing that kids in India and in Africa, over 2/3 could not even read or write basic words or paragraphs. They couldn't add or subtract 2 numbers. And it felt like we had to tackle that problem. I perhaps should have thought about my own personal life as a parent. So by that time, Ishan was a few years in, and he was learning to read and struggling. And I remember going to his teacher and like any worried parent saying, what can we do? And she said, "Sharath, don't worry. Ishan is like my own son. I'll do whatever it takes to help him read." And now he can devour a book in a day, and he's a real bookworm. When I think back to what she did, yes, she helped him to do phonics well, and she did some reading training. But what she really lit up was this love of reading, the autonomy that he feels he can control his own reading. The mastery, every day he was getting it better. That excited him and kept motivating him. And the purpose, she made him really get a deep love of books and a sense that of so much was possible once he could read. That's what unlocked the thing for him. And so, as we've been learning more about the research into children, neuroscience, psychology, economics, etc., we're learning that the foundations of being a lifelong learner, of getting that deep joy of learning, they need to happen in school. We spend a lot of money in India and other parts of the world skilling people for their first job. But many of this room are going to graduate out into the wide world. You'll have probably in India between 10 or 20 jobs over your lifetimes. We can't keep skilling you each time. We've got to get those conditions right in the school itself. And that means things like feeling safe in school, emotionally and physically. My wife is Moroccan. She grew up in the Moroccan school system, and she would be beaten on the knuckles, not for doing something bad or mischievous, but for getting an answer wrong. How can you learn if that's the environment you're in? Kids have got to be engaged in the classroom, actively learning. When I went to Indonesia recently, I went to many classrooms where kids could read or write, they can add and subtract, but they were just sitting at their desk writing down what the teacher was saying. They couldn't apply their knowledge, extend it, discuss it, share it. The Indonesian government is terrified there's a workforce coming that will not be ready for that modern world, that model of unknown unknowns. So it's critically important for children to ignite and create that fertile soil for them to love learning. They've got to develop curiosity and critical thinking and self-esteem and confidence along the way. That was my first blind spot with children. a similar one happened with teachers. And the irony here is I am the product of a great teacher. I wasn't lucky enough to study here, but I did my undergraduate at Cambridge University in the UK. I only got to Cambridge because of the sheer stubbornness of a teacher of mine who saw something in me that perhaps no one else saw. I didn't think Cambridge was right for me. I didn't think I was good enough to get in. But he just would not listen. And one day he literally almost forced me into the back of his car. I think safeguarding standards were a bit more relaxed those days. Drove me up the motorway to Cambridge and physically stood outside admissions offices while I went to talk to different tutors there. And that simple act of stubbornness changed my whole life. So I knew what great teachers could do, but I read about Indian teachers who 1 in 4 wouldn't show up to school on a given school day in government schools. I read about a Ugandan survey of teachers that showed that 80% of teachers would quit the profession if they had the chance. So I thought we've got to do something. We can't worry about motivation. It's a lost cause. Let's focus on getting teachers to learn better practices. So we started to stir in 2012 in Delhi with the search for what we call micro-innovations, small-scale teaching practices from teachers that could help improve classrooms across the country. And we scoured that summer, it was the summer of 2012, about 100 schools, talked to over 400 teachers, all across the slums of Delhi. And I remember I fell into potholes. I had to ask directions from earwax removal wallas and cycle rickshaw wallas, and the mosquitoes are much more reliable friends than the GPS or Google Maps in these far-flung corners of the city. But we finally got some great ideas, and just an example, a personal favorite was a teacher called Bindu, who had found a way of teaching her kids English poetry, Wordsworth and Kipling, using Bollywood beats as a way to help them memorize it. We found these ideas, we published them, and we felt very, very satisfied with ourselves. And then something went wrong. For a few days in our office in Delhi, and there were just 3 of us those days, our phone did not stop ringing. And the calls were all from teachers who said, look, I know my idea was not selected. I'm not arguing. I know that it was a fair process, but you've ignited in me something I've not felt for a long time. You've helped me see why I became a teacher in the first place. And it became so frequent we had to do something. So we tried a small experiment. We called all 400 teachers we'd talked to at random, and invited them to the beginnings of what we call a teacher network. We hired a huge rickety wedding hall in the outskirts of Delhi, not too far from here, in fact. It's the biggest place we could find at the time. And I remember it was a Sunday we'd booked, Sunday morning, a bit like today, but much hotter. It was the summer, 43 degrees centigrade. I remember looking at the thermometer in the morning. And it was the final day of a big test match between India and England. And we were just guessing how many would show up. I remember I bet 80 people, 80 teachers. And in fact, 340 showed up that morning. And I remember that morning just being full of the sound of laughter, of joy, of teachers sharing their experiences. So now all we do at STIR is not worry about technical practices so much, but worry about building networks of teachers, monthly meetings where 20 or 30 teachers come together for a couple of hours, go through a structured process where they're exposed to new evidence, new ideas, but they're not told what to do. They decide what to do in their classrooms. They discuss and share their new ideas. They practice it together. They commit to each other, and they observe each other trying it out in their classrooms to reinforce that behavior change. So again, another lesson for us has been, really again for teachers, that soil is as important as the technical seeds. My third and final knockout was in the area of government. And a few years ago, we were working very happily in Delhi in about 70 or so schools. And suddenly I got a call, I was in London then, from our country director, Sandeep. And he said, Sharath, the state government has got hold of me. They want to take these teacher networks that are being run from 70 schools to all 1,025 schools across the capital and reach about 1.5 million children. I said, Sandeep, this is a great 10-year plan. He said, no, Sharath, it's not 10 years. They want us to do this in 3 months. So I just put the phone down and said, Sandeep, this is crazy, goodbye. 2 days later, another call from Sandeep. The government won't listen, they still want to get hold of us. I put the phone down and just thought, my God, I've got to give this guy some assertiveness training. The third day, 2 days later, another call, and that by the time I booked my ticket to Delhi and came. And I remember coming to this very nice office in the Chief Minister's office and talking to his key advisors. And I said, look, this is a crazy idea. And they said, Sharath, look, we like what you're doing. We think this approach to motivation really matters. We want it for all schools or for no one. Go big or go home. So forced in this decision, there wasn't much choice. I said, okay, we'll do it. But look, I've got 7 staff in Delhi now. I can just about find funds for 3 more. But you've got to do the rest of it. You've got to ensure that your people then run these teacher networks every month, and they manage it. It's part of the government system fully. And over those 3 months, we worked on a way to do that and achieve that. And I think it's, honestly, despite my reservations, the best thing we ever did. This approach is now owned by the government. It's fully sustainable. We're energizing and motivating officials in governments who are looking at teachers. So that same sense of autonomy, mastery, and purposes with them. We now run 8,000 teacher meetings a month. 200,000 teachers are active in 4 states in India now, with state governments, and a quarter of all schools in Uganda. And about 6 million children are being impacted through this approach, through that government adoption. So what I can say at the end of this 8 years of this fighting in the boxing ring is that all 3 times I was wrong. All 3 times I was punched, maybe even knocked out. And at the end of the day, I've learned 3 really important things. One is that children can fall back in love with learning again, and they can become lifelong learners while they're in school. I've learned that teachers can fall back in love with teaching again and can want to become the best professionals they can be. And I've learned that governments can fall back in love with their jobs and their teachers. And maybe I should have listened all along to that old Indian wisdom and adage that you can fall in love after getting married. So looking back, it's been a tough 8 years, but so energized by the wisdom that's come from this journey. And I think more than anything else, so excited that we kept in the ring, kept standing up each time we got punched and knocked out. And we have big plans for the future. We believe we can get to 2 million teachers by 2025 and 10 million teachers by 2030, the end of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we can get 300 million children in India, in Indonesia, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, but in many other countries of the world, to really become those lifelong learners and develop that joy of learning that will really help them succeed in this world of unknown unknowns. And what's also been really powerful from this is that the ability to stand up, keep fighting, has really led from that very, very painful blind spot. It's given us the source of this incredible breakthrough. Thank you very much.